Okay, welcome back. Funny story. I just started recording a podcast that I'd already recorded. In fact, it was the last one I'd recorded. Sometimes I do recording for coach development stuff, and I think this would make a great podcast topic. And I rewatched a video that was edited, and I thought this would make a great podcast topic. And I evidently did that last week and actually recorded it last week. So here's a new topic for you. I'm going to talk about queuing today. I want to unpack a little bit more about like where queuing comes from, understanding the role of queuing, and just helping unpack it a little bit so you can understand maybe why queues have or haven't worked for you, or if you're a coach, why they have or haven't worked for clients. And it sounds like, oh yeah, queuing, who gives a fuck? It's boring, but it's actually really interesting and surprisingly has a huge impact on coaching and lifting as a whole because it is so deeply connected to our understanding of these movements of squat, bench, and deadlift. As a spoiler alert, you can't effectively cue for these things unless you understand them in depth. And that really is the key to all of this. So the first step is sort of like, what is even queuing? Queuing is obviously, language that we use to try and elicit a response in a lifter. And the important stipulation here is that that response is a biomechanical action. Why I say that's important is because it's not just about how something looks, it's about what's being performed. And so to sort of like clear the air on this is the difference between saying, okay, why should the knees look a particular way on the squat versus just pushing knees out? We don't actually want the knees to go out. We just don't want them to come in. So knees out is therefore not going to be an effective cue. It doesn't talk to what we're actually trying to achieve. So in order to sort of start unpacking queuing, you have to understand that it has to be connected to a biomechanical action, and you need to understand the biomechanical action if the language connected to it is going to work. Most queuing goes wrong because it's either related to a visual effect, what you want it to look like, or it's too far removed from the biomechanical action. And as I go through this process of explaining it to you, I'll give you some real life examples to make it make more sense. Broadly at ZeroW, we teach queuing, or we use queuing on 3 different levels, and that's kind of what I want to talk through. The first level, the most important level, is going to be like the developmental cues. So these are the fundamental cues to elicit specific actions. And when I say developmental cues and queuing in general, mostly I'm talking about squat, bench, deadlift. And so our developmental cues are how we fundamentally build the 3 lifts. And so in order to do that effectively, you have to understand those 3 lifts in depth, and we have a very defined system around this. And so let me talk through just something like squats, right? If we're talking about the hips on squats, or we're talking about queuing on squats from sort of the waist down, people are saying things about feet, about where the feet should lie, about 3 points of contact with the feet, about midfoot pressure. People are talking about knees going in or out or forward or back. People are talking about hips and the action of the quads. People are talking about stacking pelvises, tucking pelvises, pushing hips back, driving knees forward. All of this comes as a result of seeing something happen that you don't want to happen, or seeing something happen and wanting to move it towards something that you'd like to happen. This is kind of queuing done in the wrong method. This is like punching yourself in the face, or smacking yourself in the face with a hammer, going to the doctor and being like, hey, my head really hurts. And the doctor's like, well, here's some Panadol. It's like, well, the problem is not the lack of Panadol. The problem is smacking your face with a hammer. It's not going to be very healthy for your face. And so like if we see the knees caving in, saying knees out can't be the solution, because we don't want the knees to go out. We just don't want them to come in. And so to answer that question, or to solve that problem, we need to know, why does this happen? And a lot of queuing and a lot of unpacking technique and understanding the movements is just a process of asking why and trying to get to the root cause. So it's like when people are talking about the tripod foot, for example, or midfoot pressure. So it's like, we want to find midfoot pressure. You want to be balanced over your midfoot. That's sort of talking about moving around your center of balance, right? That language and that cueing makes sense, but isn't necessarily effective. Because if you're not able to do that, there's a reason you're not able to do that. And that reason is not the inability to be aware of the balance point of the midfoot. And so if you fall into this category, that cueing then is really fucking frustrating. It's like, I'm trying to find my midfoot and it's just not working. I just keep falling forward, or it just keeps losing balance back. The reason being because it's not an absence of trying to find the midfoot, it's an absence of something else in the system that isn't quite working. And so if we can create a fundamental understanding of what we're trying to achieve from a biomechanical perspective, we can create language that speaks directly to that. And I maintain that cueing a squat should be as simple as cueing someone to make a fist. Close your hand and open it. If you can understand the series of biomechanical actions that you're looking for, you can formulate language that speaks directly to that. That kind of highlights a point I made earlier, which is like cueing sometimes gets far removed from what we're trying to achieve. And I mean this from a literal geographical sense. The perfect example of this, the example that I use all the time of this, is the cue of pulling the bar apart on bench press. You have to ask the question, okay, what is pulling the bar apart trying to achieve? You think about, okay, pull the bar apart. Maybe it's even followed with language like pull the bar apart to create upper back tightness or scapular retraction. Okay, pulling the bar apart, that action of like a rear delt fly, the goal of that is to create scapular retraction. So you do that, you create scapular retraction, great, fantastic, great cue, right? Well, no, not necessarily. Why are we talking about your hands on the bar to create scapular retraction? Can't you just talk to that? Can't you just say pinch between your shoulder blades? So I'll take a step further to understand why this is so important, because this just seems picky. It seems like what's the point of this conversation? Well, we being coaches, inherently have a problem when we come to deciding our cues of this internal bias we have. So let's say you've never been exposed to pull the bar apart to feel scapular retraction. You understand how to retract your scaps. You understand how to lift. Most coaches are lifters and are practicing lifting. You understand the feeling of creating scapular retraction, and you understand that the cue is trying to create that feeling, that action. So you grab the barbell, you think, pull the bar apart to create scapular retraction. What do? All your brain power goes on scapular retraction. So you do it, and you get this bias of like, whoa, my scaps are lighting up. I can feel this like crazy. This is a great cue. That's backwards thinking. That's so biased. That's creating the feeling because you already know what to look for. What you want to do is the opposite. You want to think, can I do this action? Can I perform the cue as wrong as possible and completely miss the goal? Can I do this cue and not achieve what it's supposed to achieve? Can I do the action of pulling the bar apart without feeling scapular retraction? Yes. Okay, well then it makes sense that some people will hear this cue without understanding scapular retraction, whether they understand it in concept, but they can't create the feeling, or they don't understand it at all. This cue can be misinterpreted and misapplied. Ultimately, it's trying to create scapular retraction. Can you use language to create scapular retraction without pulling the bar apart? Pinch between your shoulder blades? Yes, you can. Well, then cut the middleman. Let's stop talking about pulling bars apart and just talk about pinching between the shoulder blades. Like if we can go through that process with every single cue and arrive at an understanding of what is this trying to achieve? Does the language I'm using achieve that thing? And then finally, can I do what the language is telling me to do and not achieve that thing? If the answer is you can do it without achieving it, or without a very, very, very high likelihood of achieving it, it's probably a bad cue. And we're like surrounded by bad cues all the time. Now, I'm not saying that if it doesn't tick every box that it's a terrible cue, because it might be used to impact the cueing ladder, so to speak. So the first cueing system or cueing structure I mentioned is this foundational cues or developmental cues. The next level of cueing below developmental cues is feeling cues. This is using language to denote the feeling that the lifter should expect. This is extremely powerful. So as somebody who works with lifters who are much stronger than me, I need to be able to do this. If I'm coaching Theo Maddox, who deadlifts 470 plus kilos, and I'm trying to get him to trust what I'm saying, he knows that I've never felt that weight in my hands. He knows that I've never performed it. He knows there's a gap between my capability and his, and therefore he knows there's a gap in what that feels like and that experience is and my own. And so I need to convince him to trust me. And the best way I can do that, besides having a catalog of results behind me, is to say something and it immediately be true. And the best way to do that from a cueing perspective is to say, if you do this, it will feel like this. And then that person, that lifter, to experience that feeling. Trust is forged immediately. You can attach emotion to the feeling to prepare someone for what they're about to experience. So This is extremely important, especially in like first time sessions or technique sessions that you're running through with people. Even though logically most people would be like, look, if I change my technique right now, it's probably not going to feel that good. There is an inherent underlying emotional expectation that a change in something from an expert should feel better immediately. And so it's powerful for me to say, okay, I'm going to get you to pinch your shoulders like this. You're going to hold this all the way down and all the way up when you do this next bench press set. And it's going to feel terrible. It's going to feel like the weight's really heavy and like all you can feel is your shoulder blades. That's okay. So I've told them it's going to be a negative experience. They experience the negative experience. I say that's going to be okay. They go through the set. They're like, okay, I trust this person because what he said came true. And then I give reassurance, but it's not going to feel that way forever. And here's what we're going to do to continue to build upon this structure or this technique, right? So the idea of creating a feeling or telling a lifter that's how it should feel, or when somebody gets something right, so do this cue, they perform it, whatever you felt just then, keep chasing that feeling. It's much easier to chase a feeling than a set of instructions. So if I watch somebody do something and there's immediate change from before based on the cue that I've given them, reinforce it with that feeling that you just got is what you were looking for. That's powerful. This is especially the case with online or remote coaching. All coaches, and probably all lifters, have experienced this at some stage too, that have worked with a coach, have had the experience where you change something in real life, looks great, they go away for a few weeks, they come back and it's right back to where it was. That's because inherently when we lift, we look for comfort. We look for normality. And if our normality is different to the change that we're trying to achieve, we'll quickly revert back to that. So feeling cues help reinforce that. So if I'm trying to get someone to fix a really rounded back on a deadlift, I've given them a set of cues and I'm like, that feeling that you get, that feels like you're arching your back, even though it's just put you into a neutral position, that tightness that you feel, the fact that it now feels really heavy off the floor, I want you to chase that feeling. That's what you're looking for in every rep and every set of deadlifts from this point until I see you next. That way, when they go away, they look for the feeling, not necessarily the cue of lock their back in or whatever it is. And they look for that feeling every time. And when they experience that feeling, even though it's negative, oh, this feels slower off the floor than before. Oh, but Thomas said that it's meant to feel this way. That's good. I want to chase that. It helps reinforce that patterning. So feeling cues are extremely powerful, but we can't run everything by feeling. There needs to be direction or developmental cues to get to the feeling. The final layer of cueing is directional cues. This is literally telling somebody to put their body in a particular direction or move their body in a particular direction. This is the lowest level of cueing, the cueing you want to rely on the least, the cueing that will have the least amount of success over the long term. And the reason being is because it's moving someone towards something. And often the max of that is a bad thing. In most cases in lifting, we want to be in somewhere in the middle. So think of knees on squats. Again, you don't want your knees out. You want them in the middle. Like if they're caving in really bad, you want them to move outwards. Saying knees out is fine if it gets them to the middle, but eventually it's going to keep going too far out. If you tell someone the same, tuck your elbows, that's a directional cue. They tuck too much, it's actually a terrible way to bench. You tell someone, get your back straight by like arching your back or getting your chest up, chest up, chest up, chest up. How many times have we heard that? Eventually you take your chest up too far, you're now in extension. That's a bad thing. So directional cues, the problem with it is that like if more is better in our heads automatically as humans, most is best. So if more knees out is better, shoving them out to the side as far as we can is best. And you'll be surprised, like if we're talking knees on squats, the knees going out too far creates way more problems from a pain and performance perspective than the knees caving in. So we don't actually want the knees to go out, right? So we don't want to rely on directional cues. However, they can get powerful to get someone to being able to feel what correct is. Then we labor the feeling point to get back to the development cue. So again, an example of this, somebody's back is extremely rounded on deadlifts. It's like using the typical cues, straighten your back, pull your shoulder blades down towards your waist, get your chest out or something like that. And it just doesn't make a dent. Maybe I'm going to say, I want you to arch your back as hard as you can. Get the logo of your shirt to face up to the roof. Get your back as arched and tight as possible. They do that and they get almost neutral. Like that's what you want to feel. You want to chase that feeling of that tension. I'm going to layer this with bracing and other fancy stuff, but just so you know, it's not that simple. But that's the feeling I'm chasing. So immediately when I get them to closer to the feeling of what the true position should be, then I go back to the feeling away from the directional cue. Okay, don't worry about arching your back. Just chase that feeling. That will prevent them over time from arching so much that they truly arch and go into extension, which is going to be bad for the deadlift. Cueing is more complicated than it sounds. It's not just a bag of cues that you pull off the internet. It has to have a defined focus, a defined reason. Jump on the YouTube and look up bracing on the ZeroW YouTube. I've got a video, it's about 6 minutes long, talking about bracing. I'll quickly cap it now because it's a really good way to tie this off and sort of finish this conversation. Because I think bracing cueing is one of the things that's done the most poorly in the lifting world, purely because of this fact that people don't understand the biomechanics we're trying to achieve. So think of all the bracing cues you've heard. You've heard things like brace like I'm going to punch you in the stomach, pull your ribs to your hips, stack your ribs and pelvis. Like these kind of cueing like stack your ribs and pelvis. I'm not trying to rag on coaches that use this. Like we're all doing the best with the tools and the knowledge that we have. But there's a lot of cueing out there that kind of says nothing. The probably the worst one with bracing is like 360 bracing. You want to feel like you want to brace with your back and your obliques. What the fuck does that mean? The problem is like when you breathe and brace properly, you do feel like this total torso expansion. So it's reverse engineering a feeling and trying to put it into language. So you're saying what's happening rather than how to achieve what's happening. It doesn't quite make sense. We need to understand what actually leads us to getting there so we can find the language to do it. And this is so important, just understanding technique and being able to coach better anyway. So really quick and dirty overview of breathing and bracing. Breathing and bracing is, well, it's a system. There's lots of things happening, and it is literally breathing and bracing. It's a complex system that involves multiple moving parts. If you say brace like I'm going to punch you, tense your abs, stack your ribs and pelvis, you're often only getting one aspect of breathing and bracing, which is the bracing part. We want the breathing part too because that helps with the pressure aspect. So what we're trying to do is play with forced inhalation and forced exhalation and the way the body changes during those states. So in forced inhalation, that's you breathing in air as much as possible. Forced inhalation is kind of denoting the fact that we can control our breathing or our body control our breathing for us. It's one of the few systems in our body that happens on autopilot, but we can also control at the same time. So we can decide to breathe in more, or you can just forget about breathing. Your body will do it for you. So forced inhalation, sucking air in, you're going to have thoracic extension. Intercostals are going to open your rib cage up. You're going to have stuff happen with your diaphragm, with your pelvic floor. You're going to have scapular elevation. Everything's going to create space in your thorax for more air to come in. When you do that, you create an enormous amount of intra-abdominal pressure. Pressure is a good thing if we're trying to maximize support around the midsection. When we do the opposite, when we force air out, our abs contract. Again, we get pelvic floor and diaphragm stuff happening. We get a decrease in pressure. We get scapular depression. We get all of these opposite things happening. Now, scapular depression, abs contracting, things stacking, things compressing. We want that when we lift. When we lift, we don't push the air out. We hold it in. So we want both. We want inhalation and exhalation together. The way we achieve that, breathe in big, try to push the air out, keep trying to push the air out, but don't let any air out. That is breathing and bracing. And so if we can understand that, when you do that, you don't brace like you're getting punched. You're literally just trying to push air out. It's just take a big breath in, try and push it out, keep trying to push it out, don't let any out. That's breathing and bracing. Just say that. Get someone to do that drill, experience that feeling. That's breathing and bracing. Now put it in the lift. Away you go. Again, cueing is super simple once you get it right. And following on from our chat on individualization the other day, cueing should be extremely global. Cueing is not an individualized part of coaching. There might be layers of cueing that have to be individualized. Like I might not need to go to feeling or directional cues with certain people, might just be able to focus on the developmental cues. That's the individualized aspect, but the language itself should be pretty consistent because it should be as simple as what I just said before. Close your fist, open it. That's how you make a fist. Close your hand, open it. You're making a fist. Close your eyes, open them. You've just blinked. Congratulations. That's how you cue how to blink. It's not depress your eyelids down towards your feet. We don't have to go to crazy lengths to say something very simple. And if we can understand how simple these movements are that we're doing, which means understanding the complexities and bringing them back to simplicity, we can find words and language that applies to everyone. And the more we can do that, the more consistent a result we will have, the more lifters will understand what they're trying to achieve with their body, the less confusing lifting is as a whole. Hope that helps. Let me know what you think, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.